Hi, everyone. Welcome to Forbes Talks. I'm Diane Brady. I'm here with Aaron Smet, who is a senior partner in McKinsey's organizational practice and also co-author of Deliberate Calm. Aaron, welcome.
Thank you, Diane.
So let's talk about this deliberate calm because the subtitle is How to Learn and Lead in a Volatile World. What's changed? We had the volatility of the pandemic and a lot of discussion around resilience. Where are we right now at the beginning of 2023?
I don't know exactly where we are, but I can tell you that even before the pandemic, we noticed a number of things were shifting in terms of how dynamic and turbulent the world was getting. The business world, the political world, the world is getting more connected and more interconnected globally, which can create a lot of ripple effects of a tiny change in one place has effects, 3 generations down the road in something else that you didn't expect. And because of the ripple effects of small changes in an interconnected world, because of the fast pace of technological change and disruption, of innovation, of AI, of, you can add whatever the latest disruptive thing is. We were predicting for a while that this is not going away. Mm-hmm. And not just we, many people have been saying for a while, we can probably expect the pace of change to just continue to increase. And for me, and for many of the people I work with, both colleagues and clients, many senior executives are saying, how can the pace get faster? How can things get more turbulent and more volatile? Certainly things will slow down. And it doesn't look like that's happening.
One of the things that this title suggests is that as the speed of change is obviously increased in the volatility, that the danger, that the risk that leaders or any of us face is that we become a little too frenetic. What is it that you're seeing that made deliberate calm be the motif that you want to stress? What failures do we have?
Yeah, so one of the things I have personally been looking at for quite a while is what are the skills that we need in the future? What skills do we need more of? What skills do we need less of? And there's been a lot of research on this from us and from others. A lot of what you see is we need more advanced technological skills. Technology skills are in demand and in short supply, and that's going to continue to be the case. You see higher cognitive skills of really innovative, creative, conceptual thinking being in short supply. More basic cognitive skills actually are some of the things being automated. So a lot of more basic physical and even knowledge work is easier to replace with technology. A third thing that you see in short supply is emotional work. This is work only humans can do, and the need for collaboration and empathy and compassion is just going up in all kinds of ways, including in basic customer service. So you see some of that being in shorter supply. But there's a meta skill that isn't a basic skill that often shows up because it's at a meta level, but it's this ability to adapt. And it's called all kinds of things. It's called learning agility. It's called growth mindset. But this is now in even shorter supply and in more demand than ever because the world is changing so quickly. And we as humans have not been wired to deal with this level of change. But we are highly adaptable. The mind and the brain is highly plastic and malleable. We can use that to our advantage, although we often don't. And so what this book is about is how do you build the muscle of learning how to learn when learning is hard?
And give us some of the tactics. My first impression would be things like you hear a lot more now about meditation. You hear a lot more about resilience. When you think about, addressing this audience, what are the steps that anyone can take to at least start to move in this direction?
Well, those are great. Meditation is great. Lots of you hear more about mental health, you hear more about sleep, you hear more about taking care of yourself. All of those things are good. They're necessary, but by themselves not sufficient. Mm-hmm. So if let's take meditation as an example, mindfulness, whatever you want to call it. If you get really good at that as a way to kind of unplug and de-stress, if when you go back into the next meeting or jump back into work, you go right back into that stress environment, while there's some benefit to your physical being of being able to have de-stressed and meditated, it may not help you make better decisions at work, because if you jump back in and go right back into that frenetic pace. So the trick isn't just learning the tools and tactics, it's learning how and when to deploy them, and when to practice deliberate calm, not just when I'm in a quiet moment of meditation at night or on the weekend, but how do I start to practice that in the moment, in the room, where I can't really just sit there and tell everybody time out while I meditate for 10 minutes. Now I've got to start practicing the muscle while I'm having a heated conversation with someone who I strongly disagree with. And I think the thing they're suggesting we do is crazy. And now I've got to practice deliberate calm real time. This is trying to build on a foundation of things like meditation, but really take it to the next level.
Aaron, when you think about the role model that you've seen in terms of best practices, where do you look for some of the techniques? I know elite athletes you've mentioned, for example. What do successful leaders do to create that deliberate calm in the workplace?
Yeah, great question. I think if you want to look at role models for deliberate calm, elite athletes provide one type, although I have a bit of caution with elite athletes as an example. Elite athletes tend to be good at getting out of their own head so they don't create their own interference when things get really stressful. So if you think about the best elite athletes, not only do they have coaches and training and routines and meditation, and there's a lot of sports psychology that goes into helping them achieve optimal performance, which I think we can learn from. One of the things that they often do is when they make a mistake, when they have a setback, one of the things they're good at is not letting that setback derail them. They're able to get back on course and go, okay, let me get back to what I know. If an elite tennis player double faults, for example, they forget that for a minute and they go back to what they know. They get really good at not derailing. The problem is they have to be aware that this is a moment where going back to what I know is going to work. In sport, the rules of the game haven't changed. And I've practiced this. I've practiced and practiced and practiced.
Right. Tennis is tennis is tennis.
Tennis is tennis is tennis. The trick for an executive or a business leader or a government leader or other institutional leaders is, what happens if the rules of the game I'm playing have changed in some fundamental way and going back to what I know is a mistake? Now I have to learn something new and not get derailed, but I can't just go back to what I know. And this goes back to one of the things you mentioned before, which is the difference between adaptability and resilience. Resilience is often bouncing back. Adaptability and learning agility means bouncing back isn't enough. I have to bounce forward into something new, which means I have to learn something new. I have to learn something new in a perhaps very uncertain and high stress environment. And that's where deliberate calm comes in. How can I learn and grow and evolve my own habits and patterns and capabilities in those really hot moments when a lot is at stake and everything at me is either wanting to freak out or wanting to go back to the comfort of what I know. And the comfort of what I know may not work anymore.
I associate McKinsey a lot when obviously people come to you when they sometimes in crisis, but oftentimes too, they want digital transformation. They want to get ahead of the curve. Have you noticed a shift in the mindset of leaders at this juncture, especially we're in a period where a lot of people are working remote? Obviously, the speed of change is accelerating. I'm curious, do you feel there's less calm? Do you feel that is actually an issue that you're seeing now more than you did, say, 5 years ago?
Yes. I would say it is a frenetic pace. There's constant change. Just when you think you have a plan that you can just stick to the plan and execute, it turns out it's much harder to just stick to a plan and execute. There are too many emergent, not just crises and threats, but opportunities that you don't want to miss.
Mm-hmm.
And it used to be that, oh, we didn't have a crystal ball. It turns out 3 years later, it's a different story. Now it's not 3 years later, it's 3 months later.
Yeah.
Like quarter by quarter, you have surprising new things that you didn't anticipate. And if you just continue to execute the plan that you had, 3 or 6 months ago, you might be missing some really important new information.
So it's a good time of year to talk about this because there's a certain new year, new you mentality that we all have. And let's speak not just to the CEOs, let's speak to people who are ambitious in their careers. They may be leaders of small teams. They may want to be leaders. Give us a sense of when you sort of set out the roadmap in the book, what are some of the things that you think people should at least start to think about? You obviously mentioned the self-care, which I think we've talked about a certain bit. What are some of the other things that you think are important that would be best practices to start now?
One of the practices that we find most helpful is practices that connect my internal awareness of myself and my external awareness of the situation, and how those two play with each other. So awareness of myself, sometimes people will take personality tests or that kind of thing, which is helpful. But what I want to know is what happens when I'm under stress.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm under pressure and things get really hard, how do I tend to react?
How do you test for that? A 360?
There's all kinds of ways to test for that. There are things on the market like a leadership circle profile. We have little exercises you can do. There's little self-reflection of think about the last time you were in a really tough situation and you were under a high amount of stress. What mindset did you have? We have a little sort of 7 mindsets that you can kind of reflect on and think about what do I gravitate toward during times of stress? Mm-hmm. And so you can use any or all of those. The point is just reflecting on when I'm under stress, what do I do? You can even think about when I'm under a huge amount of stress, how do I unwind? How do I cope? What are my coping strategies? Mm-hmm. And sometimes coping strategies are good in the short term, but not in the long term. So if you unplug and disconnect for too long, that might not be helpful. It might not serve you. It's avoidance. It's avoidance, exactly.
Does it matter
so
whether
how do I cope with stress in ways that are preparing me to deal with the stress and the things that are causing it?
So what does it matter whether you are working remote, working in an office? Because we're in this transition period as well, especially with the economy where people are being called back to work. Again, it's anecdotal and it's very personality driven, but have you noticed any shift with regard to how the workplace structure impacts this?
I think there are changes. I mean, this is just another change that we're all adapting to. But there are people who, when they feel under stress, find comfort in activity. Mm-hmm. I find comfort that somebody's working on something. Okay, so if that's one of my reactions to stress is there's an enormous amount of pressure, we might or might not achieve a hard thing, there's all kinds of curveballs being thrown at me. Let's imagine that for a moment, one of my tendencies under stress is to say, boy, I just feel better when I see a lot of people doing things. Well, now in a virtual world, it's a lot easier to get a meeting. Mm-hmm. We don't have to be in the same place. We don't have to find a conference room. I can just launch a virtual meeting, and people are now working from home at odd hours. I'll just schedule a meeting from 5:30 to 6:30 p.m. Mm-hmm. virtually. If other people have a similar tendency, we could end up having a lot of virtual meetings that don't necessarily accomplish much, but serves my need to feel like people are working on them.
Busy work.
So, and I do think for some people that is exactly what's happening. They are not actually getting better outcomes. And in fact, the productivity in some cases might even be going down. But boy, it feels like a lot of people are working on it, and that makes me feel good.
Now, I know there's no easy pat answers, but some of the things that you talk about is how to make biology work for you instead of against you. Talk a little bit about that, even if you personalize it in terms of your research for this, what you've done or what McKinsey has done to really inculcate this as something that leaders do.
Well, I'll talk for a minute about how biology can work against us. Then I'll talk about how we can flip the tables. Our brains are really amazing at forming habits, at forming ways to do things that make things more efficient for us. I don't know if you can remember maybe when you first learned to ride a bike or learn to drive a car. Mm-hmm. And in those moments when it's brand new, it takes all your focus and attention. It's like, don't talk to me, don't have the radio on. I learned on a manual transmission stick shift, and I was like, I got to focus all my thought and energy on driving this car. Mm-hmm. Now, when I'm driving, I can be having a conversation. I can be listening to a podcast. I can be, I try not to do phone calls anymore for safety reasons, but for a while I used to do that, and I felt like I could do that just fine. In fact, sometimes I get so lost in my own thoughts, I realize I'm driving a normal path to a place okay. that I wasn't actually trying to go. I'm like, oh, I wound up at the office when actually I was meaning to go to the grocery store. So that's an example of a habit that serves us because it frees up cognitive capacity to work on other things, because we've taken something that was hard and complex and made it easy mm-hmm. through repetition and habit. Now, the problem is when things get stressful, when we're under pressure, when there's a lot of uncertainty, when the stakes are high, we tend to go back to our habits. We tend to pull those levers that we know well even harder. And at times that serves us well. If you step off the curb and a bus is coming at you and your natural reaction is to jump out of the way, that's great. That's a survival instinct that's well worn in our brains, and that instinct serves us. But what happens when our instincts no longer serve us and we keep doing the same thing that's not working? So that's the bad news, where these habits just are really hard to change, and sometimes we don't even know we have them. They're habits of mind. They're habits of how we lead. They're mm-hmm. habits of how we motivate others, how we respond to a crisis or a threat. And now it doesn't work anymore. Now just barking out orders and telling people to do better isn't going to work. We got to do something different and change our leadership style. It's hard, but because of neuroplasticity and the ability to form new habits, we can fundamentally unlearn old things and learn new things in ways that are really remarkable. But it requires us to put ourselves in a position to unlearn the old and learn the new.
So it's a learning mindset. And one of the challenges that everybody has is there's your own personal goals, and then there's the infrastructure of the companies in which you operate. Do you find that a lot of companies are starting to appreciate the need to create space for this? Or how do you, the organization has to also adapt to these realities as well, does it not?
Absolutely. Many organizations are built around routines, there's a standard operating model. This is what we do every week. This is what we do every month. This is what we do every quarter. And these routines, even the unwritten ones, are often fairly deeply ingrained. And with the level of volatility and uncertainty facing many organizations today, it's creating an unprecedented set of unexpected disruptions and unanticipated opportunities that companies need to constantly now be rethinking. Are these routines serving us? What is the situation calling for? Is the way we've always done it still working? Do we need to rethink and change? And so heightening that level of reflection and awareness, not just at an individual level, but an institutional level, can be really helpful.
I want to root this a little bit in the present situation of what's happening in the economy, not just the headwinds, but a lot of fear, I think, not just about layoffs and getting a new job, but the impact that things like generative AI are going to have on jobs going forward. So let's start with the fact of how do you hire for this? Because we talked about the Myers-Briggs model. Is there a way to be hiring for this skill set that you want to see in future leaders, that deliberate calm, or any way you can demonstrate it to an employer if you're actually trying to either move up?
There is a way to hire for this. Although I'm not sure that's what I would do. I think I would start developing the skill. These are learnable skills. They're not fixed traits. And so I think hiring for it almost reinforces the notion that these are fixed traits, which is actually the antithesis of a learning mindset. But I will say that in personality research, for decades, there's been a common model of how to think about personality. So by training, I'm a psychologist. I have a PhD in social and organizational psychology. And so for a long time, I've looked at, what personality traits serve us well. And there's something called the ocean model, where O is openness to new experience, C is conscientiousness, E is extroversion. I won't go through all of them, but you get the idea. There's 5 sort of big personality traits. And if you look at one like extroversion, people think, extroverted leaders are more successful.
Right.
It turns out that's not true. There's no basis to say extroverts are better than introverts. They're just different. The one personality trait that has had a positive correlation with performance for decades was conscientiousness. The ability to show up, deliver, be consistent, be reliable. The others all seem to be mixed. Only in the last 10 years has it started to flip, where openness to new experience has started to be a stronger positive predictor of performance. And this is why. It is the pace of change, the amount of volatility and uncertainty is now creating an environment where openness to new experience is starting to be a better predictor of performance than conscientiousness. And there are things out there, there are personality instruments out there that you can use to test for this. Having said that, that is not the approach I would take. These are not fixed personality traits. These are skills that can be learned. And I would try to train all my folks, especially my most important high potential leaders, on learning how to learning how to adapt when it matters most, learning how to know when I need to adapt and when actually going back to what I know is the right answer.
By changing the script for them a lot. So if I have a team, let's take a bit of advice here. I have a team, I want to, help to bring this skill. Do I maybe move them around more often than I might otherwise be inclined to? Do I talk to them differently? Anything you'd suggest by way of advice?
I would certainly start asking them different questions. And the questions I would ask would be rooted in helping match what we're bringing and the approach we're taking to the situation. Is this a situation where doing what we've always done will work if we just execute better? And sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes it's, we just didn't execute well. If we could just execute what we've always done better, that would work. In many cases, what companies are finding is the answer is no. If we just execute what we've always done a little bit better, it is not going to be sufficient to meet the needs of the moment. One of the examples we use in the book, which I think is a great example, is the Miracle on the Hudson.
This is Scully landing the plane with no engines.
Solely landing the plane with no engines. Now, when there was a bird strike shortly after takeoff, a bunch of people said, we have a playbook for this. They pulled out the playbook and they said, Captain Sully, turn that plane around and come back and fly. Now, here's the problem. The bird strike, an engine is out, was one engine is out, not we have no engines. But in the crisis, everyone except the pilot was falling back on the known playbook, which likely would have been catastrophically bad. So Sully practiced deliberate calm in the moment and said, wait, hold on. I think we're now following a playbook that is not suited to the situation. Yes, it's a playbook for a bird strike shortly after takeoff. Yes, it's when an engine is out. Is this meant to handle when all the engines are out? I don't think so. Now, there are a few of us who will just naturally be inclined to do that in that moment. Most of us are not. Most of us need to practice. So rather than just roll the dice and hope that in that moment you'll do what Sully did, we can practice these things and build that muscle and have a whole workforce of leaders at every level who, when that hard curveball comes at us with a situation or threat or crisis or opportunity that we had never anticipated, we can actually step back and say, wait, hold on. Is the way I'm about to do this the right way, or should I rethink this?
So definitely asking, I think, different questions. And any other advice you would give to people who are in a current environment, and clearly there is a lot of stress, external and probably internal as well, that you think about in terms of setting the seeds for success in order to adapt to what I think is, a volatile climate, to say the least, and to your point, a fast-changing one?
One of the pieces of advice I would have is rethink your natural tendency when things aren't going well. In a more stable environment, if things aren't going well, it's because somebody blew it. Somebody messed up. Somebody made a mistake. And the question is, what went wrong? What in the system broke? Who failed? Who's to blame? And if we have a pretty stable system that's been working for a while and the external environment hasn't changed, then that's probably a fair assumption. Mm-hmm. But what if nobody blew it? What if the system didn't break? It's just no longer suited to the situation because the situation has radically changed in ways no one anticipated. Then looking for whom to blame or what's broken and how can we fix something to get the machine working again is probably a terrible idea. There are certain adaptive emergent problems where you can't just solve the problem because it's not a problem to be solved. It's a new situation that you have to live into in a totally different way. One of the examples I give is I have a teenage daughter who's trying to think about college. And where should I go to college, and what should I major in, and what do I want to be when I grow up? There's no amount of solving that as a problem, like as a technical problem to be solved, that will help her figure out what does she want to be when she grows up. Some of the problems we face now in society and in business are that kind of problem. Like, you can't fix it. You have to reimagine what you want. And that's a whole different set of questions. It's not what went wrong, what's broken, what needs to be fixed, who's to blame. It's what is the situation now? What do we want? What do we hope it's going to be like in 5 years? What could be possible? There's a completely different set of questions that leaders often aren't well equipped with in moments when things aren't going well. But if the reason things aren't going well is because the external environment has radically changed, some of the go-to questions we usually ask around who's to blame and what went wrong might not serve us very well.
Well, I definitely think it sounds connecting the dots and deliberate calm. So thanks. Good luck with the book, and look forward to continuing the conversation. Thanks, Aaron.
Thank you so much.